John Gill's exposition of the entire Bible, verse by verse. 1 John, chapter 2, verse 1. My little children, the apostle may address the saints under this character on account of their regeneration of the Spirit and the grace of God, in which they were as newborn babes, and on account of his being the instrument of their conversion, and so was their spiritual father, and therefore calls them his own children, and he might the rather use such a way of speaking because of his advanced age, being now in his old age, and John the elder in age as well as in office, as well as to show his parental affection for them and care for them, and that what he wrote or should write was not from any disrespect, but from pure love to them, and it might serve to put them in mind of their weakness in faith, in knowledge, and spiritual strength, that they might not entertain high notions of themselves, as if they were perfect and without infirmities. And it is easy to observe that this is one of Christ's expressions, John 13, verse 33, from whose lips the apostle took it, whose words and phrases he greatly delighted in, as he seems to do in this by his frequent use of it. See 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. These things write unto you concerning the purity and holiness of God, who is light itself, concerning the fellowship with him, with no one that lives in sin can have, concerning pardon and cleansing from sin by the blood of Christ, and concerning sin being in them, and they not without it. The Agapic version reads, we write, as in 1 John chapter 1, verse 4, that you sin not that he thought they could be entirely without it, either without the being of it or the commission of it in thought, word, or deed, for this would be to suppose that which is contrary to his own words in 1 John chapter 1, verse 8. But he suggests that the end of his writing on these subjects was that he might not live in sin and indulge themselves in a victorious course of living, give up themselves to it and walk in it, and work it with all greediness, and nothing could be more suitably adapted to such an end than the consideration of the holiness of God, who calls by his grace and of the necessity of light and grace and holiness in men to communion with him, and of the pardoning grace of God and cleansing blood of Christ, which, when savingly applied, sets men against sin and makes them zealous of good works, and of the indwelling of sin in the saints, which puts them upon their guard against it. And if any man sin, as every man does, even everyone that is in the light, and walks in it in his fellowship with God, everyone that believes in Christ and is justified through his righteousness and pardoned by his blood, every one of the little children, for the apostle is not speaking to mankind in general who sin, for Christ is not an advocate for all that sin, but to these in particular. Hence the Arabic version renders it, if any of you sin. And this with the following, he says, not to encourage in sin, but to comfort under a sense of it. We have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. Christ is an advocate, not for just and righteous persons, for as he came not to call these to repentancy, nor to die for them, so such have no need of an advocate, nor is he one of them, but as he came to call sinners, and to save them, and died for them, the just for the unjust, so he is an advocate, and makes intercession for transgressors, and not for all men, though they have all sinned, not for the world and those so called in distinction from the persons given by the Father. For these he prays not, but for all the elect, and whatsoever charges are brought against them, he answers to them, and for all that believe in him, be they weak or strong, even for the apostles as well as others, for they were not without sin, were men of like passions as others, and carried about with them a body of sin, and had their daily infirmities, and so needed an advocate as others, and hence John says, we have an advocate, etc. But then, Christ is not an advocate for sin, though for sinners. He does not vindicate the commission of sin, or plead for the performance of it. He is no patron of iniquity, nor does he deny that his clients have sinned, or affirm that their actions are not sins. He allows in his courts all their sins, with all their aggravated circumstances, nor does he go about to excuse or extenuate them, but he is an advocate for the non-imputation of them and for the application of pardon to them. He pleads in their favor that these sins have been laid upon him, and he has bore them, that his blood has been shed for the remission of sin, and that he has made full satisfaction for them. And therefore, in justice, they ought not to be laid to their charge, but that the forgiveness of them should be applied upon them for the relief and comfort of their burden and distressed consciences. And for this, he is an advocate for his poor sinning people with the Father, who being the first person, and the Son, the advocate, and the Spirit sustaining a like character, is only mentioned, and he being God, against whom sin is committed, and to whom satisfaction is made, and the rather as he is the Father of Christ, and of those for whom he is an advocate, seeing it may be concluded that his pleadings will be with success, since he is not only related to him and has an interest in him himself, but the persons also whose patron he is are related to him and have a share in his parental affection and care. Moreover, this phrase, as it expresses the distinct personality of Christ from the Father, so his being with him in heaven, at his right hand and nearness to him, where he discharges this office of his, partly by appearing in person for his people in the presence of God, and partly by carrying in and presenting their confessions of sins and their prayers for the fresh discoveries and applications of pardoning grace, which he offers up to his Father with the sweet incense of his mediation, and chiefly by pleading the virtue of his blood, righteousness and sacrifice, which are carried within the veil, and are always in sight, and call aloud for peace and pardon, as also by answering and removing the charges and accusations of the court adversary, the accuser of the brethren, the devil, as well as the declaration of his will, demanding his point of justice, in consideration of his sufferings and death, that such and such blessings be bestowed upon his people, as pardon, righteousness, grace, and supplies of grace, and at last glory, and by applying these benefits to the souls as a comforter, which the word here used also signifies and is so rendered. John chapter 14, verse 16, and by the Arabic version here. Now the saints have but one advocate, and that is enough for them. The apostle does not say we have advocates, but an advocate. Not angels nor saints departed, but Jesus Christ only, who is the one mediator between God and man. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5. And he is a continual one. He ever lives to make intercession. His blood is always speaking, and he always pleading. And therefore it is said, we have had, or we shall have an advocate, or he is a prevalent one. He is always heard. He thoroughly pleads the cause he undertakes, and ever carries it, which is owing to the dignity of his person, his interest with his Father, and the virtue and value of his sacrifice, and he every way fit for such a work, for he is righteous, not only in his natures, both divine and human, but in his office as mediator, which he faithfully and righteously performs. He is a very proper person to plead for guilty persons, which he could not do if he himself was guilty. But he is so holy and righteous that nothing can be objected to him by God, and it need not be doubted by men that he will act a faithful part to them, and righteously serve them in their cause. And it is moreover his righteousness, which he has wrought out and is imputed to them, that carries the cause for them, and therefore this character of Christ fitly added, as is also the following. The Jews have adopted the word in the text into their language, but have applied it to a different purpose, to alms, deeds, repentance, and good works. Much more agreeably, Philo the Jew speaks of the Son of the perfect virtue as an advocate for the forgiveness of sins and for a supply of everlasting things.